Seminary doesn't just educate Christians. Sometimes it shatters them. And it's not because they suddenly stopped loving God. It's because in seminary, they learn things about the Bible and Christianity that they were never exposed to in the pews. Now, if the faith that you've inherited doesn't fit your lived experience anymore, if you have questions you were never allowed to ask, and if you're still drawn to Christianity, but you live on the edge of it, I'm Bo McGuffey, and I want you to know that you are in the right place. In the next few minutes, I'm going to name what happens in seminary to break faith, why it breaks, and why it's now happening outside of seminary faster than churches know how to handle. For many seminary students, the breaking point isn't dramatic, really. It's pretty ordinary. It comes through a lecture, it comes through a reading, or it comes through conversations with other seminarians. But generally speaking, it's almost always related to one of the main things that you learn about in seminary, which is critical biblical studies. And that's where you learn how to read Scripture in the context in which it was written. And so you start to ask questions like, who wrote this text? Or when did they write this text? And for whom did they write this text? And what kind of writing is this? Or why do these stories appear in more than one version? And for some people, this is great stuff. The Bible becomes so much more alive for them. For others, though, it sends tremors through their nervous systems. Because you see, where they came from, they weren't just taught that the Bible is sacred. They were also taught a system of certainty. Let me be clear, seminary really does break faith for some people. Why? Well, it's because the Christian framework that they inherited can't handle the complexity that they're now seeing. I mean, think about it. If you had been taught that the Bible speaks with only one seamless voice, or that every passage should basically be read the same way, or that questions are dangerous, or that certainty is proof of faith, then when you encounter the complexity in seminary, it doesn't feel like it's learning at all. It feels more like betrayal. And then the questions start to emerge, especially this one. If this isn't true, then what else isn't true? Trigger the fear. And then that leads to, why didn't anybody tell me any of this before I got here? Trigger the anger. You see, the problem is that back home, faith got fused to certainty, and certainty got fused to God. So when certainty collapses, God can collapse with it. And that's where faith can snap. Once deconstruction starts, whether in seminary or later, people generally end up in one of two places. One place says, look, I know what I was taught wasn't true, but you know what? I can still have faith. And those people grieve their loss, they rebuild, and then they enter into a more mature relationship with Scripture. The other place, however, says, if it wasn't true, then the whole thing is just a lie. And those people really can't stop at, well, my church just got some of these things wrong. They have to jump right to, and I can't trust any of it. So what we have here are two very different reactions to the same experience of rupture. And the difference seems to be that the more someone's faith was welded to certainty, the more likely that rupture would lead to a total collapse. Why is this important today? Well, because it's not just happening in seminary anymore. It's happening in the pews. The gateway to all of this disruptive information is no longer the seminary classroom. It's now the Google search bar. It's now an AI personal research assistant. Right now, in this very moment, anytime anybody wants to, they can hear biblical scholars talk about the Bible in an academic, in-depth way. They can learn about genre, history, context, and how text develops over time. So the same complexity that used to hit seminarians is now hitting everyday Christians. And unlike those seminarians, those Christians in the pews often have no guide, no framework, and no language to talk about what's happening inside of them? Sometimes when people enter into deconstruction, they feel lied to. Well, were they lied to? Maybe. I can't really say. But what I can say that is sometimes questions were discouraged and academic scholarship was hidden. But I consider that to be more tragic than malicious. Because you see, pastors and parents generally handed people the version of the Bible that helped them to make sense of the world. And for them, that stability was a gift. The problem is that the stability that they passed on was built on an expectation. And it was the expectation that Scripture would function primarily as some form of perfect information. You know, you open the Bible and you get the answer or the insight that you need. And what happens, though, when that expectation breaks? Faith takes a hit. And a person's generally not going to recover from that unless they are able to make a very specific shift. Here's the shift that keeps deconstruction from becoming a spiritual freefall. You have to accept that the Bible is not a magic oracle that grants you access to the mind of God. Instead, it is a witness. Think about the difference this way. In a courtroom, they're going to focus on evidence. And one kind of evidence is irrefutable fact, kind of like a lab report or something like that. That is not what the Bible is. Another type of witness is a testimony. And all a witness does is tell you what they saw, what they heard, and what they experienced, and what it meant to them, and it's only their perspective. That's the kind of witness that Scripture offers. The Bible isn't God's private diary. It's a messy library of human experience within a faith tradition. For example, what it means to write history today is very different than what it meant to write history in the ancient world. So if you try to force the telling of history that we find in the Hebrew Bible to work like a modern history book, of course it's going to sound made up and not true. But that's not the kind of truth that it carries. The truth it carries is the kind that forms people spiritually. And when you read Scripture as a witness, faith no longer depends on the Bible being simple. Faith depends on how it facilitates spiritual growth. If seminary or a podcast or your own personal study has caused your faith to start to crack, here are 3 stabilizers that you might find helpful. First, I would encourage you to separate God from your certainty system. If God only exists where you feel sure or you're comfortable, that's not necessarily faith. That's more like control. Second, grieve what you've lost. I mean, you didn't just lose your beliefs. You lost your safety. You lost your life map and maybe even your community. That's real loss, and it's significant. Please don't downplay it. And third, ask different questions when you read the Bible. Forget all about that factually precise stuff. Instead, focus on things like, what is this text doing to my heart? Or who is this text trying to protect? Or who does this text challenge? And then there's my favorite. What kind of love does this text call forth? So yes, seminary does break faith for some people because it exposes a certainty-based Christianity that was never built to handle complexity. But that breaking doesn't have to end in cynicism. It can become the doorway for a deeper faith, one rooted in transformation rather than trivia. So that's enough about my rambling. If you're up for it, I'd love to hear more about your story. When you started deconstructing, which direction did you feel pulled in? Was it the not true but still faith? Or was it, it's all a lie? Tell me which one and what pushed you there in the comments. And if you've made it this far, I'd love it if you were to like and subscribe. I am Bo McGuffey with the Evolving Christian Faith Network. Until next time, Peace.